I'm David Otunga, the only Harvard-educated lawyer in the history of professional wrestling and WWE. Now, the question I get asked most often is how and why did I go from Harvard Law School to WWE and professional wrestling? Now, in order to answer that, I got to take you back to the beginning. Now, I grew up in a suburb of Chicago called Elgin, Illinois, in the 1980s. And I was a huge fan of guys like Hulk Hogan, The Ultimate Warrior, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone. And I knew what I wanted to do from the time I was 6 years old. I knew that I wanted to be a professional wrestler and an action hero. I also knew that I wanted to have giant biceps like those guys. So from the time I was 6, whenever somebody asked me what I wanted to be, I would tell them, yeah, a professional wrestler and an action movie star. But my mom would tell me I needed to have a fallback career, which actually was great advice. Both my parents were educated. My mom was a high school teacher for 38 years. She taught special ed and behavior disorders. My dad was a high school administrator. My dad actually was an immigrant from Kenya. He came over to the United States in the 60s in the same program that Barack Obama's father came over in. My dad went on to earn his PhD, 2 different master's degrees, and a certificate of advanced studies. I didn't know what that was. So I looked it up, and apparently a certificate of advanced studies is higher than a master's degree, but not quite as high as a PhD. So basically, my dad had almost an additional PhD. Pretty much he's the most educated man I've ever known. So school came pretty easy to me. I wasn't really interested in it, but I got good grades. But I was always concerned with being outside, playing sports, you name anything other than with my head stuck over a math book. So I went to the University of Illinois where I was a pre-med student. And when it came time for me to graduate, I started getting nervous because I knew that I didn't want to go to medical school. I wanted to be an actor, like I said, but how do I tell my parents this? So it turned out that I got the opportunity to manage a cognitive neuroscience laboratory at Columbia University, which sounded incredibly boring to me. But my dad thought it sounded amazing. He was so proud of that. And that I was going to be at one of the Ivy League schools, Columbia. And my dad had told me about growing up in Kenya, how the one college that he knew of was Harvard. And it was in the Ivy League. And it was just like this mythical place that he didn't even really think existed. But that was the one college that he knew of. He was so excited that I got this job there. I moved to New York City. I lived in Harlem, on my own for the first time at 22, and I loved it. And not the job. The job was all right, is what it was. It actually was pretty boring, if I'm being honest. But the reason that I thought this was a good idea was because, one, I didn't have to go to medical school. I was able to put that off and make my dad happy. But number 2, Broadway is in New York, and I wanted to be an actor. So I thought for sure, I'm going to get my big breakout here. This is exactly what I need. So I was really close with my dad, and we would talk every day on my lunch break. And I remember one time I was having a conversation with my dad, and he was telling me about how he'd always wanted to be a lawyer, but he never thought he was smart enough. And this is wild to me because, like I said, my dad had basically 2 PhDs and 2 master's degrees. He had more degrees than anybody I've ever met, and he didn't think he was smart enough to be a lawyer. Like, that's wild. So I had a friend named Dave who was studying for the LSAT at that time, the law school entrance exam. And I'd been talking about it with my dad, and I was like, what if I just take the LSAT, just to see how I would do. So I call up Dave, and I'm like, hey man, when's the LSAT? And he's like, oh bro, it's 3 weeks away. Like, I'm stressed out. I'm studying round the clock. And I told him, I was like, yeah, I think I'm gonna take it. And he was like, what? Not this one. He's like, bro, you can't just show up and take this test. Like, I've been studying for this for like 6 months, and this is the second time I'm taking it. It's like, if you take it more than once, they're going to average your grades here. This isn't something you want to take lightly, which great advice from Dave. I'm not going to lie. But I tried to explain to him, I'm not really trying to go to law school though. This is just something fun I'm doing with my dad. So anyway, I end up taking the LSAT, and I did way better than I expected. Like, I did pretty good. I did really good, okay? Anyway, My dad is over the moon about this. And he's so excited. He's like, all right, well, now we're just going to apply to all the Ivy League schools. We're going to apply to Harvard. We're going to apply to all the top 10. And so I think I remember my dad literally like filling out applications for me and emailing them to be like, all right, here, David, we need a writing sample on this one. But anyway, I completed my applications. I send them off. And it's funny because, my dad and I talk every day, and he'd be like, all right, son, did you hear anything back? Have you heard from the schools yet? I'm like, Dad, we just submitted them. Like, it takes time for them to review the applications and whatnot. And then I got a call this one day, and my dad had a sudden heart attack and died. Yeah, that was the most difficult thing, I've ever had to deal with. That. Just shocking, out of the blue. Yeah, we're completely devastated. And I end up flying home to Elgin to be with my family. And while I'm there, I think it's about 2 weeks to the day or so, I find out that I got accepted to Harvard Law School. It was so bittersweet because on the one hand, this is such an amazing accomplishment. But on the other hand, my dad just missed it. And I know he knows. In fact, he probably had a hand in it, if you know what I mean. But I still just wanted to see that smile on his face and share that hug with him. Like, for my dad, this would have meant the world. Like, hands down, knowing that his son was going to go to Harvard Law School would have been far better than him winning the lottery. Like, having a son at Harvard, way better than winning the Powerball. It put me in this weird space because this is just something I was doing for fun with my dad. I never expected it to go this far. But now, what do? I never planned on going to law school. But my mom told me, she's like, David, you are not going to turn down Harvard Law School. And I thought about it. And, I figured I'm going to go to Harvard. I'm going to get my law degree. And I'm going to do that to honor my dad. Because this is something that would have made him so proud. And this is something that he always wished he could do. And I did it. As you can see, my Harvard Law degree hangs behind me, right beside my championship titles. Sorry, Vince. But that's one of my proudest achievements. And it's not just because of, the academics and the academic rigors that I overcame, but it's what it meant and what it means to me and what it would have meant to my dad. So now that I'm at Harvard, I spent my first summer working at the public defender's office. I was an intern at the Kane County Public Defender's Office, which I loved. I loved helping people who actually needed help but didn't have enough money to afford adequate representation, but who really needed it. Like, I really liked seeing how I was able to help people in their lives. Now, the second summer, I interned at the top law firm in Chicago, Sidley Austin, and that was very different, very, very different lifestyle. And I'll say this, when it came time for me to graduate, I was torn because on the one hand, I really enjoyed the work at the public defender's office and helping people. But on the other hand, I got school loans I need to pay back. And Sidley Austin was going to pay me how much? Wait, you're going to pay me what? Sorry, I want to help people, but hey, Sidley, y'all have a pro bono department there? Oh, you do? Word. Right out of law school, I think that they were billing me upwards of $700 an hour just for me to read a document. And then if I'm not mistaken, it quickly went up to $900. That was really hard to turn down. Plus, my mom was so excited about this. And she was bragging to all of her friends, yeah, my son got a job at the top law firm in Chicago. So she was super excited about this. And during that time, I would go home and visit my family every weekend. I would go see my mom and my sisters every weekend. And one of the things we would do together is we would watch TV. There was something we watched, and whatever it was, it came on after Flavor of Love. And so I would go into the family room, sit on the couch, and my niece Kylie, who was 13 at the time, she would already be sitting there watching Flavor of Love. And I would tease her, like, Kai, why are you watching this ridiculous show? And then week after week, she would always be in there finishing it up. And I found myself, teasing her every week, but then teasing her a little bit less. But oh yeah, Kylie, this show is ridiculous, but who went home this week? And the next thing you know, I'm hooked. I started getting into what? No. Chances left? What about real? Fast forward, few months, a year, I'm at the firm and I get a phone call, and it's from a casting director, and it's on my cell phone. And the casting director is like, "Hi, is this David Otunga?" I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Hi, I'm calling to set up your audition for I Love New York 2. And I'm like, "Wait, excuse me?" They're like, "Yeah, this is David Otunga, right? You're a lawyer, a bodybuilder." "Yeah, that's me." They're like, "Yeah, I have your application right in front of me." But the interesting thing was, I never filled out an application. So what are they talking about? But yeah, they're describing me, and they have my cell phone number. Like, how did you get this? So they claim they have an application that I filled out that I clearly did not fill out, but somehow they did get my information. So anyway, I say thank you, but no thank you. At this point, I think this is a joke. Like, I think somebody is messing with me. So I call my sister Lissy right after this, who's one of my best friends. I'm like, "Lissy, you're not gonna believe this, but I just got this crazy call from somebody who claims to be a casting director. And guess what? They said they wouldn't have booked me for I Love New York 2. And she starts laughing. She's like, "Oh, yeah, somebody's joking with you." Come to find out, a few days later, Lissy calls me back. She's like, "You're not going to believe this, but that was real." And I found out how that happened. Kylie typed up an application for you, somehow got it to a casting director. The casting director saw it and loved it, and, would reach out to me. And then they reached out to me again, I think probably 2 more times. I turned the show down, I want to say like 3 times. And then one of the times we were on the phone, he said to me, "Look, if you ever had any desire of getting into entertainment, this might be a great first step." I thought about it, and I'm like, I've been trying to break into acting and entertainment, my whole life. It's so just strange how this came about, but what if this is my opportunity? And also, at the law firm, I mean, I never intended on becoming a lawyer, and I always wanted to be an actor and get into entertainment. So I said, "You know what? I'll give it a shot." And I also like how they pitched it to me. They told me that, the producers weren't necessarily happy with how the black men came across in the first season. And so in this season, they wanted to cast somebody who was, upstanding and basically a hero, a baby face, if you will, in wrestling parlance. And that would be me. So I said, all right, I'll give this a shot. I went, I did the show, and I loved it. I mean, it was so much fun. And it was so much fun because I was a fan of the show. And so, like, I took everything for what it was. Imagine, like, sitting back and watching your favorite TV show with your family, and then, you always say, "Oh, I would do this if I was on that show," or "I would do that." And then you actually get the opportunity. And then not only that, but I got to bring my family on the show who I watched it with, which is awesome. I'll have to make another video on this entirely because I could talk about that forever too. So anyway, I do the show I Love New York 2. And after that, I go back working at the law firm. And I'm telling you, it was one night, nobody knew who I was. And when that show premiered, literally the next day, I'm walking down the street and people were yelling, "Hey, Punk, are you Punk? Punk!" This was insane. But anyway, it really opened my eyes to just the power of TV, and especially reality TV at that time. And, I started thinking, and it was like, well, I've kind of got my foot in the door, maybe not a foot, but I've got my toe in the door. I need to strike while the iron is hot. Like, I need to see what I can do and try to get things shaken now. So I made the biggest decision of my life. And I remember it was a Sunday, and I was in my mom's kitchen at her kitchen table talking to her and just, kind of laying all this out to her and telling her, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I know what I want to do, but I don't know how to get there. And I remember my mom told me that I needed to quit the law firm because it was holding me back. That was wild to me hearing that, because here's this lady who was so proud when I got the job at this prestigious firm, was bragging to all of her friends. Now she's telling me to quit. But the thing of it was the right answer. And I knew it was the right answer. And secretly, I think subconsciously, I was hoping to hear that answer for her, because once I heard it, it's like, that's all I needed. And it's like in Rocky 2, when Adrian finally tells Rocky, "Win." And Mickey's like, "What are we waiting for?" It was very much that moment in real life. And I remember the next day, I went in and told my senior partner that I was resigning, which was a wild conversation in and of itself. I remember he asked me why I was leaving and if I was going to another firm or what I was going to do. And I looked him straight in the face and I said that I'm getting into entertainment and I would like to get into professional wrestling. And he kind of stared at me, sideways. He wasn't sure if I was joking or if I was being serious. And I was very serious. And I remember he kind of chuckled and laughed at me, which I always remembered. That ended up being one of the scariest times of my life because, like I said, I was making a lot of money at this law firm. Those checks coming in were huge. And after that, they stopped. And this was the first time in my life where I didn't have the next step planned out. Like I had no safety net. I just jumped. So I knew where I wanted to go. I'd been going on auditions here and there, but still, I wanted to become a professional wrestler. And I remember, I think I Googled it. Somebody looked this up, like, how do you become a pro wrestler? How does one get into WWE? Because back then, there was no such thing as developmental or NXT. That didn't exist. And it was very secretive how you can get into professional wrestling. Like, how would somebody even start? And whatever source I found said that you have to wrestle for a minimum of 5 years for WWE to even consider hiring you. And well, I had no experience at all. So I started looking around to find wrestling schools. I figured, well, I want to go to a school and learn. If I put my time in now, I'll be able to make it. Hopefully I can make it, sooner than 5 years. So I found one school that was I think it was in California. And I called and, nobody picked up. I left a voicemail. I think I called for a few days and never got anybody. I, left a few messages and kind of just figured, all right, well, that's a dead end. I don't know if this is going to work out or not. And it must have been 2 or 3 months later. I get a call on my cell phone again, and it's a guy from that wrestling school. But he says to me, hey, I'm producing a reality show for Hulk Hogan. I think it was Hulk Hogan's Championship Wrestling or something like this. And he's like, I know you did reality TV. Would you want to be in this show? I'm like, yes, yeah, of course. Like, this is going to be my big break. This is going to be my way into WWE. So I'm thinking in my mind, like, yeah, I want to be in this show. So he calls me back like a day or two later. And he's like, hey, I'm really sorry. I got some bad news, but the spot's not open anymore. It got filled. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, it got filled by Frank Stallone, I believe. I'm like, Frank Stallone? Who's that? Sylvester Stallone's brother. Like, he's got a brother? Devastated. Shout out to Frank Stallone, though, who I didn't know who he was before that. But anyway, devastated. He took my spot. I'm crushed. Man, that was going to be my way in. And then he says to me, hey, have you ever thought about trying out for WWE? I'm like, what? Yes, man, yes. That's why I wanted to do your show. That's what I'm trying to do. And he's like, oh, you don't need this show for that. And he's like, I can get you an audition with them. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, I don't have any wrestling experience. And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. He goes, they'll be interested in you with your look, your physique, Harvard Law School. They'll be interested. I don't know. I was a little skeptical. He's like, trust me, they'll be interested in you. 2 weeks later, I got flown to Houston, Texas to go to SmackDown. And I went to the show, went in, met the head of talent relations, who ended up being Johnny Ace, who would be Big Johnny in my future, but that was the first time I ever met him. John Laurinaitis was the head of talent relations. We met SmackDown, Houston, Texas, and we talked for a little bit. And he said, you know what, kid, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to give you a tryout and send you to Tampa, Florida, and give you a week-long tryout. So I flew to Tampa, Florida, showed up at this warehouse that was FCW, and walked in there and met Dr. Tom Pritchard and Steve Kern, Dusty Rhodes. Norman Smiley wasn't there yet, but he came after that. I had a week-long tryout, and then 2 weeks later after that, WWE signed me to a developmental contract and sent me down to Tampa to FCW full-time. It was one of those things that seemed like it was impossible, but I knew where I wanted to go. I just had no idea how I would get there. And, even looking back, like, as I talk about this, wow, that was, it was so organic, but nothing that I could have predicted And so when people ask me why I left Harvard Law School to become a WWE wrestler, the answer is because I never intended on going to law school. I never intended on becoming a lawyer. I always intended on becoming a professional wrestler and an action movie star. And if this isn't the perfect example of, manifestation and speaking things out loud, then I don't know what is, because things that I spoke out loud from the time I was 6 years old, 20 years later, they manifested, they came true. But even looking back on it, it's like this. I had to go the route I did. It's unconventional and it's unique. Nobody else has ever taken this route, and I don't think anybody will ever take it after me. But I had to go to Harvard Law School and become a lawyer in order to become a WWE superstar. Why is that? If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have stood out. I would have been just another guy trying to become a professional wrestler, but it was my story, my journey that made me. And that's what, attracted me to WWE, ultimately Vince McMahon. I remember John Laurinaitis shared something with me, and he said, kid, there's one thing that Vince always respects about you, and that's that you don't need to be here. You're one of the only guys who doesn't need to be here. You had a full career before this, and a career that people dream of, but you're here because you want to be. That really stuck with me, because that's how I felt too, is that I was finally doing what I wanted to do. I already had my Harvard Law degree. Nobody could ever take that away from me. And I did that. I did that for my parents. I did that for my dad. I did that for my mom. The law firm, I did that for my mom as well. Now I was doing something for me. Finally, I became a professional wrestler, and that led me to becoming an actor as well. So that's my story. I hope that I answered that for you guys fully. Might have been a little bit long-winded, but I had to provide context. I will make a video diving deeper into I Love New York too. And please, let's keep this conversation going, because I just started my YouTube channel and I love interacting with you guys, and I love making videos, answering your questions. So please let me know what you want to know about me and what you want me to cover next. Please like the video if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like it. I know that happens to me all the time. Please subscribe, and please share the video with somebody if you liked it, or you think, hey, maybe they should hear this. It really does help the algorithm. And look, I'm trying to grow my channel so I can keep providing more content for you guys. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time.